We're going on tour in the new year. Check out Cricket.com for tickets to our February swing in New Orleans, Charleston, and Durham. And there will be many more dates added throughout the year. We would love to see you at a show.
Those are fun cities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun February swing.
My mother called me and just said, "Good news, we're going to be in New Orleans when you're there. That's where we're going to meet you."
No way.
Yep. I was like, "Oh, great. That's the perfect place. That's perfect."
Your
So
folks.
excited for Fran and Robert to show up in New Orleans.
Brian and Robert and one of those big-ass beers they sell on Bourbon Street.
Oh, man. It's going to be great. Can't wait.
Also,
Sorry, Mom and Dad.
if you want to see this little podcast in action live on your computer screen, you can go to youtube.com/cricketmedia. Sign up, join.
Smash that like button.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, to the news. On Friday, a federal judge ruled that the Affordable Care Act is unconstitutional just one day before the end of the enrollment period for health care coverage. Even some conservative legal scholars and Obamacare opponents were surprised at the scope of the ruling by Judge Reed O'Connor, who'd been considering a lawsuit filed by a group of Republican attorneys general and ultimately argued that the entire ACA must be dismantled because Congress eliminated the individual mandate in 2017, which requires that everyone carry health insurance or pay a fine. That means every part of that law would go: the Medicaid expansion, protection for pre-existing conditions, staying on your parents' insurance until you're 2016, everything. The case will be appealed up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals by Democratic attorneys general and Democrats in Congress, and it could end up in front of the Supreme Court, where all 5 justices who upheld the ACA in a landmark ruling in 2012 remain on the bench. Guys, why do so many experts and scholars from across the political spectrum think that this ruling is horseshit? Ted Frank, a lawyer at the Competitive Enterprise Institute who's critical of the ACA, called the decision embarrassingly bad. Jonathan Adler, who was the architect of the last conservative strategy to dismantle Obamacare through the courts that failed, called the ruling surprisingly weak. Why was it so bad?
Brutal smackdown.
Brutal smackdown by conservative legal scholars.
Okay, so when we talk about the 2017 tax cut,
Yes.
we often say that the individual mandate was struck down.
Mm-hmm.
That's not actually accurate. What happened was the tax was reduced from whatever number it was to $0, but the individual mandate itself still exists. So Republicans, a whole bunch of attorneys general in states across the country, filed this suit, and they went forum shopping for this specific judge because I don't think that, where is he again? They went,
Texas.
Sorry, there's a specific thing. Blah, 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 blah. They went forum shopping for this specific judge, Judge O'Connor. The Texas AG does this all the time. He likes to try major cases challenging Obama-era policies in Wichita Falls, Texas, where he's the only district judge who hears cases, and in Fort Worth, where he is the only district judge who is not semi-retired.
What a racket.
Yeah. This, remember back in the day
You
when...
got your Republican AG installed, you got a judge in bumfuck somewhere.
Yeah. Remember when Republicans used to talk about legislating from the bench and activist judges? This is the definition of it. So what they did was they went to this judge and they argued that Obamacare is now unconstitutional because it's no longer a tax with the individual mandate, and that those provisions, you can't separate them from the rest of the law. I don't think anyone agrees with that. Nobody agrees with that. It's called a severability argument. But that is what this judge did, which means now the insurance companies can discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. It means...
Well, not now.
I'm sorry. Let me say that again. It means that if this is upheld, and it will be appealed, it'll go to the Fifth Circuit and maybe the Supreme Court, depending on what happens. But if this was upheld, it would get rid of all of Obamacare, all of Medicaid expansion, all protections for pre-existing conditions, the little calorie counts on the menus at the restaurants you go to. All of it is now gone because of this little minutia tax argument.
So that's one bright side.
Bright
I'd like
side.
to get those calorie counts off the
Get 'em
fucking
off.
menus.
I'm at Sizzler for a reason.
I don't need to know what's in this crusted chicken Romano Cheesecake Factory. No one needs to know.
No one needs to know.
I mean-
That's not information.
What's
For you get it.
What's so ridiculous about this is Judge O'Connor wrote that the law remains coercive because, quote, the individual mandate continues to mandate the purchase of health insurance. But that is simply wrong.
Simply wrong.
As Chief Justice John Roberts noted in a case where the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act, saying that it attaches, quote, no negative legal consequences to not buying health insurance beyond requiring a payment to the IRS, a payment that is now set at zero.
Zero.
Then O'Connor says the entire law is invalid because in 2010, Congress claimed that the mandate was essential to the operation of the act, and the judiciary is supposed to uphold the intent of Congress. The problem is that completely ignores the intent of Congress in 2017, which was to eliminate only the mandate penalty and leave the rest of the law intact. So you're supposed to uphold congressional intent, but congressional intent specifically in 2017
No,
said
only 2010 intent.
it is so crazy.
Old intent.
So most people think that this is a complete joke, that this will not survive scrutiny by the Fifth Circuit, though even if for some reason the Fifth Circuit does uphold it, which some people say, it could be possible, it would be very tough to imagine the Supreme Court upholding it, since the same majority that upheld the last mandate is still sitting on the court. Of course, the problem becomes, I think the bigger problem would be, is if there was another Supreme Court vacancy while this works its way through the appeals process, which could take a couple of years.
It's very scary.
So that's the scary part.
And just to go through the stakes real quick, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, 52 million people, or 27% of non-elderly adults, have a pre-existing condition. And so they could be denied insurance. And again, Medicaid expansion is at risk in 37 states that have accepted it, as well as Nebraska, Idaho, and Utah, where voters just approved it, and Maine, where the governor is about to approve it. So before Obamacare, the uninsured rate for non-elderly adults was 18.2%. Now it's 10.3%. This is just a grenade rolled into 1/6 of the economy, to the most sensitive thing that we all deal with in our lives. It is, potentially a massive deal if upheld.
So
And I think and it's, sorry, what were we going to say?
No,
No,
you
you-
make the point first.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that makes this so troubling is, on its face, it is silly, right? It is silly to say this whole thing must be thrown out because of this one provision. On its face, it is seen as being legally specious. On its face, it seems like something we shouldn't have to worry about. And yet, we can't be certain. We can't be certain because the same trend that led to this kind of manipulation of the law to get it in front of this judge, that would lead this judge to make this kind of ridiculous argument, is the same trend we see playing out in bigger and bigger ways, all the way perhaps to the Supreme Court at some point. And so we're in this place where if things were fair, if the rules applied, if we could count on conservative justices to do not even the right thing, but in this case, don't drive 40 fucking miles out of their way to do the wrong thing, we'd be okay, but we just can't be certain, which is, I think, why, despite the fact that this is so frivolous, it is something that we're talking about and is something to worry about.
And it was timed to be announced right before the end of open enrollment in a blatant effort to make people read the news and say, oh my God, Obamacare was struck down, not accurate. But then you're not very likely to enroll if you think that might be a possibility.
Right, and that's an issue. I think what's very important is that everyone listening to this knows that in the short term, this means absolutely nothing for the Affordable Care Act. Nothing is changed. Nothing is weakened. You can sign up for health insurance. All of the provisions remain, and that will remain true throughout this appeals process, which again could take months, could take years, could take years. Specifically, O'Connor has not ordered an injunction of the law.
Right.
The Trump administration has said that they don't want an injunction of the law. That's the Trump administration, which operates on a different plane than the actual president. The people at HHS are actually saying, like, we don't want the thing to be stopped, and while Trump is celebrating it.
The
So nothing
literate
happens
people
to the law.
are,
So
having a
nothing
different
happens
voice.
to the law during the appeals process. But of course, we have to worry about the appeals process and worry about the Supreme Court. It does seem like it's very obvious that if the same Supreme Court hears this case as heard the last mandate case, it will not be upheld because Robert's reasoning is exactly contrary to
how we do
O'Connor's
that.
reasoning. But we do, like you said, we have to worry if there is another vacancy. So let's talk about the politics of this. Dave Weigel wrote a good piece in the Washington Post where he said that Democrats are happy to talk about this ruling while Republicans are not. He wrote that, quote, in 2020, Democrats plan to make this decision infamous and ask voters whether they want their health care to be decided by some judge they've never heard of. Is this a no-brainer issue for Democrats to focus on in 2020, no matter what happens?
Yes. I mean, one thing that I think is fascinating about what's been happening in the past few years is it's almost like the anti-Obamacare forces have kind of become zombified. It began at, first they tried to stop it with every tool at their disposal, and then it passed, and they said people weren't, they were going to try to stop it before it went into effect, and then they said, oh, people are going to hate it, and ultimately, it will collapse under its own weight. All their prognostications didn't happen. All their abilities to stop it didn't happen, and it was always predicated on this idea that we're going to replace it with something better. That Obamacare is terrible. It's going to make your health care worse. We're going to repeal it, and we're going to replace it. And we're so far from that idea now, right? Because this isn't an effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. This is an effort to just rip it away and replace it with nothing, something that Donald Trump supports, something that Republican AGs and Republican governors have supported across the country. And what to me is interesting about all of this is that it's easy for them to try to make Obamacare a boogeyman before it went into effect. It's also easier to make Obamacare a boogeyman when you don't have to be responsible for what happens if it goes away.
Right.
But now they're like, oh shit, right? Like if this were to actually
Definitely.
happen, if we were to actually see what they're going to get, it's politically unacceptable.
And I think that Republican politicians are not going to be able to just let this go by pointing to this judge and saying, oh, it's his fault. If you voted to gut the mandate, which everyone did from Senator Susan Collins on down, you were you laid the groundwork for this ruling.
Totally.
And and I think the Democrats can fairly campaign on, first of all, Republicans just lost 40 seats in the House and a whole bunch of governorships based on healthcare is one of the big issues.
Based on this suit,
Based on this,
in a lot of cases.
And now Democrats are going to be able to say this Republican politician has cast votes to destroy Obamacare, and now the fate of Obamacare and the fate of health insurance for 20 million people, pre-existing condition protections, all the rest, hangs in the balance because of the votes that these Republican politicians have taken.
Yeah. I mean, in a bizarre, I guess it's not bizarre. Trump didn't defend the law of the land. He instructed his attorneys to say that essentially, they agreed with the suit, but they didn't want Medicaid expansion to go away. So they were sort of tiptoeing around this to begin with. I think Dave Weigel is like one of the smartest political reporters out there. The characterization of Democrats is happy about this ruling goes too far for me because I think we're all scared to death of this ruling. But I do think this cuts right through the Republican lies about healthcare. I mean, they were attacked based on this suit during the campaign. They all pretended that they can pass the pre-existing conditions are bad and we hate them too act of 2018 and make it all go away. But that's not how the system works.
Well, that's to me like this is just a bigger version of that fight where we said, all these Republicans that lined up behind this lawsuit, they don't believe in protecting you from pre-existing conditions, and they all acted with this sort of outrage. How dare you?
Yeah.
How dare you say that about us? You know that I want to protect my children have pre-existing conditions. I am a pre-existing condition. I am a case of asthma. And yet, of course, as Tommy says, when push comes to shove, right, this is the policy they got behind. And now we're going to see that exact same fight play out, I think, over Medicaid, which is equally popular, sort of on the same plane of popularity as protecting people with pre-existing conditions, because now this lawsuit has sort of become an effort to get rid of Medicaid, where they'll all now say, but I don't want to get rid of Medicaid. I just sued to get rid of Medicaid.
And I will say that, I am not happy about this at all. I'd rather have people keep their health insurance than have a political issue in 2020. I think we'll have plenty of those. Weigel also wrote that, quote, the legal threat to the ACA has radicalized Democrats, growing their internal constituency for a massive expansion of health insurance through Medicaid and Medicare, which have faced no legal opposition in 50 years. Why are some people on the left arguing that this ruling could lead more Democrats to support a single-payer system like Medicare for All?
I mean, I think this is, and I think Ezra, I agree with him here. I think Ezra Klein wrote something similar, which is the Obamacare approach, thanks to Joe Lieberman, you guys have heard us mention how great he is before, was a market-based approach to expanding healthcare, to getting more people covered. We worked with Republicans. We took a bunch of old Republican ideas and cobbled together this plan that wasn't the one some on the left would have wanted, but I think it was the most achievable option at the time. I think when Republicans attack an effort or a policy that they once supported in these bad faith ways, you can draw a direct line from death panels to today, these bullshit attacks, and they've cut all the funding to market the plan and tried to undercut it in a million ways, then that does make me think, okay, the only thing they can't try to sabotage is a Medicare for all type plan. And
Right.
why wouldn't we push for something like that when we know that they're going to do this?
Because Medicare is protected both by its political popularity and by the fact that, like you pointed out, there's been no legal challenges to it, and so as you point out, right, and it's good for everyone to notice. I mean, we make fun of Joe Lieberman all the time for this. It wasn't just Joe Lieberman, right? I mean, fixing the healthcare system and reforming the healthcare system requires a bunch of moderate Senate Democrats, and the caucus as a whole right now is more liberal than it was back in 2010. But still, think about all the Senate Democrats who were worried about DACA. We couldn't get on board for this, that, the other thing. Like, it is still going to be difficult for Democrats to find, well, the truth is, no one's finding 60 votes in the Senate for Medicare for All. It's just not happening. So the only way that Medicare for All is passing if there's a Democratic president is to get rid of the filibuster and pass it with 51 votes. Even then, it's going to be hard to get 51 votes for Medicare for All, but for sure, it's not passing with 60 votes. And look, I think if we had gotten rid of the filibuster in 2010, it still might have been hard to pass a public option, but we might have had a better chance.
Yeah, I mean, right, because Lieberman wasn't alone in killing the public option. I think sometimes Lieberman actually...
Ben Nelson's there, you
got
Mary Landrieu.
Lieberman, there's a lot of people that use Joe Lieberman like a human shield on the public option. That people wanted it to die, and Joe Lieberman's taken a lot of the blame for it. I mean, he deserves it. He sort of led the fight. But he was really responsible for killing the Medicare buy-in for even people 55 and older. I think it's an important distinction because it tells you just the razor's edge we were on to try to get something through, because the last thing to come out of the bill was allowing younger people to buy in, kind of a public option for middle-aged people, and even that was considered too liberal for people like Joe Lieberman. The one thing I'd add to this too, that you look at what's been happening with Obamacare, and all the attacks and all the successful fights have been around the market-based side of it. It's been around the mandate, it's been around the exchanges. Where Obamacare has been at its most robust is on Medicaid, the place where we just made a government program to give people health care. Not only has it...
Except with the one exception of the Supreme Court ruling that states do not have to expand Medicaid.
Yes.
Which is what we're dealing with now.
Right. Well, so we've had Republican legislatures, Republican governors being unwilling out of spite to take free money from the federal government to expand Medicaid for their people and bring money in for their hospitals, which is one of the most despicable acts in modern public life. But at the same time, even as Obamacare is viewed as this partisan cudgel, we saw Medicaid expansion pass in Idaho, in Nebraska, in Utah. So even in some of the most blood red conservative states in the country, the government-run parts of Obamacare are the most politically palatable.
Kentucky.
I mean, look, voters want a simple, elegant solution to healthcare that is easy to understand, that is not complicated. This has been the problem with healthcare. When the Clintons tried to pass this, it was an extremely complicated policy to explain. Obamacare became, by the end, an extremely complicated policy to explain. It is, when you have a simple expansion of public health insurance, whether it is a buy-in, whether it's voluntary, whether it goes all the way, whatever it may be, it's not only easier to understand, it's easier to withstand legal challenges, and it is the reason why Democrats are going there, because the private health insurance, the basis for Obamacare was, okay, Republicans are at least going to be willing to compromise to go along with ideas that they themselves have supported in the past, is what you brought up. And that is not true. Yeah. Republican politicians do not want to go along with ideas they support. So we can thank them. If they wonder why we're going to Medicare for All, it is their fault.
But I feel like there's a distinction here, though, because originally the idea was, let's do this compromise. We'll get some Republicans on board, all right, and we'll do a market-based balance of some public, some private, some regulation, some cost controls, and we'll cobble this thing together to try to get everybody health care, because it's the most that we can do in a bipartisan way. That dance lasted for the better part of a year, but when Chuck Grassley and Olympia Snowe and all those senators went away, this task of passing anything, even with just Democratic votes, became a huge problem. And so, yes, this started out as a bipartisan compromise, but even when it was a Democrats-only bill, this was still the most liberal thing that could pass.
Right, yeah. But exactly. I mean, it's just the individual mandate was a Republican idea. Like, we used to be like, Mitt Romney, you proposed this idea, so therefore you should support it.
Yeah.
Did not work.
And look, those moderate Democrats, we can blame them for this, but they are also responding to voters who have real fears when you try to change the healthcare system. I mean, just so everyone knows, like a Medicare for All system would move 160 plus million people off their health insurance that they have now through their employers to a public system. That will be better, and that will protect them better. It's going to be better insurance. But think about what we went through in the Obama administration when just 3 million plans were canceled to give people better plans with more protections. It was the biggest scandal of the year.
I think the lesson of 2016 is that you campaign on big, clear, bold policy ideas, but we should not fool ourselves that the implementation or passage of these laws will be easy, because it will be messy. It's 1/6 of our economy.
That's
it will
right.
massive jobs, special interest money, all kinds of fights will happen around this.
Doesn't mean we should trim our sails.
No, we
but
should do it.
I do think that politicians who are talking about this should let voters know just how difficult it's going to be, because otherwise it sounds like another broken promise when they realize how tough it is.
Yeah, one thing also I think is we see like the contours of what the debate is going to be in 2020, and I think it's going to be some version of, is it Medicare for all with a transition period? Is it a Medicare buy-in, which is more like a public option? And I think that there's a policy question there. There's also a political question as to what we should be advocating. I do not think it's a clear-cut case. And the one thing I would say is, if we ended up in a system where there was a Medicare buy-in that worked, that where anybody who wanted to buy into Medicare could have it, while people could keep their private insurance and take that political cudgel off the table, that would be a really, really good thing. And there are very progressive Democrats who have advocated for it, not because they're afraid of Medicare for all, not because they're afraid of single payer, but because they legitimately believe it is the best and fastest way to the most progressive outcome. And I think that is a legitimate debate, and I don't think it is fair to make the buy-in debate versus the single payer debate, the buy-in versus Medicare to all debate, a purely ideological one, because it just isn't. It just isn't.
Or to, I hope all the Democratic candidates debate those two options, and actually there's many more options than that.
Of course.
But I really hope that you don't start attacking people as sellouts and traitors and stuff like that just because you pick one of those options. Because they are all light years ahead.
The only way to avoid that is to stay off Twitter. A real quick shout out: Sarah Cliff and Dylan Scott did a rundown of all the Democratic health plans that are out there for Vox, and it is fantastic. It is so smart and well done, and makes it easier to understand.
Okay. Let's move on to the Trump family crime syndicate. Here's the Washington Post over the weekend. 2 years after Donald Trump won the presidency, nearly every organization he has led in the past decade is under investigation. That includes his business, his charitable foundation, his campaign, his transition, his inauguration, and his administration. His former campaign chairman, deputy campaign chairman, foreign policy advisor, national security advisor, and personal lawyer are either in jail, have gone to jail, or are going to jail. And federal prosecutors have implicated the president himself in multiple felonies. I know that we've all been waiting for Mueller to drop the big one, and he still may. But even if he never says another word, isn't Trump in a very different place politically than he was just a few months ago?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what we may realize is, you can go up to the counter at an ice cream place and you can say, "Give me the biggest fucking sundae that you have," and then you have no sundae. Then a few minutes later, somebody hands you a gigantic sundae. And that's a lot of ice cream. You can also go to a place like Yogurtland and go from little thing to little thing, all right? And put a little bit of each flavor into your cup.
With the toppings?
With toppings and all the rest. And maybe you didn't notice, but over the course of that walk down the ice cream row, and down the topping
you start
zone
with just a few pulls,
and
then you start putting fruit on it, and then by the end, you're like, "Is this an entire Reese's peanut butter cup?"
Yeah,
cookie dough,
and maybe it's hard to define it, right? Maybe you couldn't say it's not just a peanut butter cup, right? There's a gummy worm in there, there's snow caps in there. You took a brownie bite, you don't know, but I gotta tell you, it's pretty delicious.
Tommy, do you have an analogy?
I don't know that I do. So the 62% majority who say Trump has not been honest about the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 campaign, who are they in the metaphor?
I think there
are people waiting to check out with their ice cream. They're just waiting to pay for the sundae.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they work behind the counter.
Look, we'll work on it. I don't know where you want to go with this because there's so many places to go.
I think that we focus so much, and we've talked about this in the past couple of weeks, on impeachment versus indictment, or both, or some combination. But the truth is, we have an election in 2020 where the voters will render a verdict on Donald Trump. And even if we don't have an impeachment or an indictment, there seems to be enough criminality, enough potential criminality, enough wrongdoing, enough ethical mishaps here on the account of on behalf of the Trump family and Trump himself that Democrats should have a pretty good story to tell.
If he wasn't president, he'd be indicted. If you guys listening out there want some motivation, the statute of limitations on campaign finance violations expire in 2021. So we got to win, or he's home free. Now that doesn't seem like how the system was intended to work, but it's worth noting. I mean, also just to focus on one of these, ProPublica did a pretty great investigation into Trump's inauguration. So some quick numbers. His inauguration raised $107 million. That is more than double what Obama raised in 2009. Bush's second inaugural planner was quoted as saying that the Trump team had 1/3 of the staff and 1/4 of the events, but they raised twice as much. And like, where did this money go? The answer is Trump's pocket. They did all their events at Trump Hotel. And now there are emails where Ivanka is negotiating the price on behalf of the PIC, on the Presidential Inaugural Committee, on behalf of the Trump Hotel, where the top planner for the inaugural is saying, hey, you're overcharging us, and it's against the law. And that they ended up offering a discounted rate. The hotel ended up offering a discounted rate of $175,000 per day for use of the ballroom and a meeting room for Trump's friends and family event at his own inauguration. And the planner was like, the fair market value is actually $85,000 per day. And so like the grifting, the corruption is so vast, and it's sitting right there because, you know, they don't know how to account for like $40 million worth of donations.
He got rich off his inauguration. Let's just talk about how Trump is defending himself from this legal onslaught, which is with tweets and with Rudy Giuliani.
Who is a human tweet.
The president tweeted that Cohen is a rat and then falsely accused the FBI of illegally breaking into Cohen's office when in reality they had a warrant, but went on to suggest that the FBI should have broken into the DNC and Crooked's office,
obviously,
which is fun for us. And then on Sunday, we finally heard the words, "Collusion is not a crime," from Rudy Giuliani, who also rejected the possibility that Trump might sit for an interview with Mueller, saying, "Over my dead body, but you know I could be dead." Is there any discernible strategy here anymore from Trump and Giuliani?
There's one. There is one, and it is there. Okay, so Rudy goes out there, and it's fascinating to watch. It is really just sort of classic sort of gaslighting.
He's not a lawyer. He just plays one on television at this point.
It's, you know,
that's Rudy Giuliani.
His glasses are trying to escape in real time. He's barely cogent. He's just firing off sentences over and over again. George Stephanopoulos can barely get a word in. But inside of that word salad are little bits of important information.
Yeah, where he further incriminates the president.
Well, it's further incriminates, but it's get something out of the way for them. So one thing he seeds in this sort of, you know, in this word romaine salad is were discussions about the tower going on until November? Sure. And you're like, wait, that's a big fucking deal. Mm-hmm. Because originally they said January. Now Cohen's saying August. We don't know when this conversation ended.
Originally it was January. Cohen lied about January. It was then said June.
Oh, June, yeah.
And now Rudy's saying November. And the big difference there, by the way, is between June and November, what did we find out? We found out that publicly that Russians were trying to interfere in the election, and at the Republican convention in July, that's where they changed the platform to make it more pro-Russia. So they were doing the deal while they changed the platform.
Yes, and that conversation goes on till November, which is a very interesting month because something happens in November, which is there's a presidential election, and then November keeps happening for weeks after. That's the crazy thing about November. So what Rudy is saying, Rudy goes out there, and it's a lot of performance, it's a lot of bravado, it's a lot of stuff that barely makes sense, but in it, he kind of lets out some information so that when we learn it in an indictment, when we learn it in a press conference, when we learn it in a confession, it doesn't have as much impact. That's one of the things he does.
Yeah, there's a couple other things from that interview that we should note. He was also asked if Roger Stone gave Trump a heads up about WikiLeaks and the hacks and the release of the WikiLeaks information, and he said, "No. I mean, I don't think so."
Oh I don't believe so. But even if he did, not a crime. Where's the crime? Collusion to commit hacking. Just that was the other thing he said during that interview. He goes, the crime is conspiracy to hack. conspiracy to hack, that's the crime. No, that's not the crime. There are a lot of crimes.
But it's also, I mean, here's the problem with what he just said. No, what he wanted to say is the crime is hacking. Conspiracy to hack means that there is multiple people agreeing to have something happen. Hack, dissemination. So yes, if Roger Stone told Donald Trump and told the campaign, WikiLeaks is coming out with a bunch of stuff, which, we think they might have in the case of, WikiLeaks found an email about Hillary's health scare, and then they told the Trump campaign and right-wing media outlets, you should start talking about her health because there's this email we have that's coming. Yes, if the Trump campaign and Trump himself were involved in all that, yes, that is a crime.
Well, I think what
crime.
he's trying to do is say, this is the little bit of strategy in there, which is you let out the air by saying maybe Roger Stone did call Donald Trump and tell him this was coming, but then then now the goalposts have moved. He's no longer saying he never knew about it. What he's saying is even if Roger Stone gave him advance notice, that's not the crime. You have to participate in the hacking. You have to direct the hacking in some way for it to be a crime. So he's just a guy being told, might as well have been the Washington Post going to run the story. Might as well have been the New York Times that got the emails. He's just a innocent bystander being told journalistic information.
He's a clown. I mean, I like the guy is not a good lawyer. He's running around the country trying to negotiate contracts for himself with every nasty dictator he can find. And I think that they're just doing a public messaging campaign to try to play for an impeachment vote down the road to protect Trump.
That's right.
It's
Yeah.
They're not smart.
So let's talk about whether this strategy is working. Tommy, you referenced this poll earlier. A new poll by NBC and the Wall Street Journal found that more than 60% of Americans feel the president has been untruthful about the investigation into his 2016 campaign. By 34%, voters say the investigation should continue. By 46 to 23%, voters think that the crimes of Trump's aides may also implicate Trump. That's a key number. The president's approval rating is at 43, and 52% that they'd probably or definitely vote for the Democratic nominee in 2020.
Bad.
Doesn't sound like it's working.
Look, I don't think it's working. I also think we should be very sad that these numbers are as high as they are. It just is sad that Donald Trump is at 43%. It never stops being sad.
Gallup has him at 38 today,
Drip,
but it's the
drip.
same. But here's the thing. It is sad for sure, but now we've had an election. We had the 2018 election, and Donald Trump begins the quest for a re-election in the hole, right? Like he can't go into 2020 at 38 to 43% and hope to win this election. So everything that happens between now and 2020 has to be some good news for Donald Trump. Donald Trump improving his standing among the American people. Mm-hmm. And so far, we're seeing it's as flat as it's ever been and at the low end of where it's been.
Yeah, I mean, we're so used to Donald Trump's bluster. And, it's so hard to tell how conscious he is of it, right? What he believes versus what he just thinks he could say, because I don't know where he lets that guard down. But one thing that I always come back to is that he was really surprised that he won.
Yeah.
In 2016, he was terrified and surprised. And so even as all this is going on, even all the kind of the show he's about to put on for his reelection, all the lying and all the claims of how well he's doing, right? There is that kernel that knows what's going on. And so when I think about how this story ends, it's again only three ways: he can be impeached and removed, he can resign, and then Mike Pence can fulfill his sacred duty, which is to pardon Donald Trump, or we can defeat him. And to me, I think that all these three things are kind of coming together in one place. I think that impeachment and removal is still the least likely option, but the story, which is why I think the story we need to tell about Donald Trump has to be a story that makes a compelling case that A, he's a criminal who will go to jail if he leaves the White House, and B, he can't win because of the crimes he's committed. Because we don't know what the future holds. This is not a prediction in any sense, but I want to know that we're doing everything we can to create the pressure on Donald Trump to choose to leave rather than face an existential thing. Because what Tommy pointed out is really important. This election is not just a referendum on Donald Trump. His freedom may be on the line. And that, to me, is so terrifying that everything we can do to create the pressure for him to think he cannot win and cannot escape culpability through normal political means, I think, is really important. And that, to me, is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and look, I think there's a message here for Democrats, too. You don't just have to run around saying he's a criminal. Like, Donald Trump lies, cheats, and steals to become richer and more powerful, and every Republican politician has let him do it. Mm-hmm. He puts his own financial interests ahead of America's interests. I mean, it's very and there is a million. It doesn't even have to be about Russia. Now we're going beyond Russia. Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, right? Autocrats, rich people, right-wing populists all over the world. He's in bed with all of them, so he can get richer and screw over the American people. That's it. I mean, that's the message.
That is the P tape. That was the P tape the whole time.
Someone said that. So I saw someone tweet that Rudy Giuliani is the kind of person who goes on TV and says, "It was a PDVD," and then he goes home and says, "Yes, I did my job right."
Rudy.
Okay. I wanted to end by talking about one of Trump's many autocratic customers, Saudi Arabia. Last week, with the help of 5 Democrats, Paul Ryan used a vote on the Farm Bill to basically block a separate vote on ending assistance for the Saudi-led coalition in the war in Yemen, which is one of the biggest humanitarian disasters in the world. The Senate actually took a vote on Thursday to limit presidential war powers, a bipartisan statement pushing back on the Trump administration's reluctance to hold Saudi Arabia accountable. But in the House, Ryan essentially slapped a rider on the Farm Bill and convinced a handful of Democrats to go along with him. Tommy, for people who don't know, why are the Saudis at war with Yemen, and why have the United States been helping Saudi?
So they've been involved in a civil war in Yemen for several years. It started during the Obama administration. They're fighting a group called the Houthi rebels, who are aligned with the former president of Yemen, President Saleh, and they are, call them what you want. The Trump administration wants to call them a terrorist group. They're an insurgency. They're whatever. It's deeply destabilizing, and the Saudis view this as a proxy for their ongoing constant war with Iran. So, I mean, first of all, we should just give a shout out to some of the senators who have been fighting for this. Chris Murphy, Mike Lee, Bernie Sanders. They're the ones who've really been pushing this bill to withdraw U.S. military aid for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. It's the first time that Congress has ever agreed to pull U.S. forces from a conflict under the War Powers Act. It's a big deal. And it also included this provision that blamed Mohammed bin Salman for Khashoggi's death. So, again, important bill, good for them for fighting for this. Paul Ryan is just going out with craven act after craven act. He snuck a provision into the Farm Bill that blocked votes on Yemen-related war powers resolutions for the remainder of the Congress. Why did he do this, you ask? What does this have to do with the Farm Bill? The answer is he's a soulless human being because it has nothing to do with the Farm Bill. He knew that the Farm Bill is this big piece of business that has all these subsidies for agricultural individuals, like food assistance, like SNAP benefits, and it put members in a tough political position where you have to say, are you choosing against this Yemen vote or American farmers? That was the messaging. Infuriatingly, 7 Democrats were not in town or abstained from the vote, and 5 Democrats voted with Paul Ryan to curtail debate on the provision. Jim Acosta of California, Al Lawson of Florida, Colin Peterson of Minnesota, Dutch Ruppersberger of Maryland, and David Scott of Georgia. The most cynical vote you could possibly imagine, tying a bill to try to save kids who are dying. At Ro Khanna, congressman estimated 1 Yemeni kid dies every 10 minutes because of this war. To tie this to an unrelated farm bill to create political pressure on these people, it defies all logic and reason. So what we need is Nancy Pelosi and the House Democratic leadership to say they will schedule a vote on this bill again the first week of January. And then hopefully the Senate can repass what they did so we can increase pressure on the administration on this awful war.
And it does seem like even if she schedules this vote, that even some of the Democratic opponents of this bill last time will vote for it this time. I think Ruppersberger said he would.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I think a lot of them were, voting. A lot of them didn't know what they were voting on, which is not
pathetic.
Not an excuse.
No.
Not as Colin Peterson gave these quotes I don't know a damn thing about Yemen. It was terrible, embarrassing for him, awful quotes. Dutch Ruppersberger is a former ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. He's from Maryland. I'm not sure what his big interest in the Farm Bill is. He should know better, and I'm deeply frustrated there. But, that's the vote. Now, it's non-binding. Trump could veto it. They could override the veto, and then it gets challenged in court and creates this constitutional crisis. But what I think, stepping back, what's good about this is you're seeing Congress take back some of its, constitutionally mandated role in trying to check the executive when it comes to war and peace.
Well, so explain this a little, because I had trouble understanding this too. If these resolutions had passed both the House and the Senate, and I know there were separate resolutions, what is the practical effect of that?
I'm not entirely sure, and I've asked some of the people who support these bills what they think would happen. The likely scenario is If the House and Senate vote for it, Trump will veto it. If the veto gets overridden, it will get challenged in court. So basically, it sends a message that the Congress doesn't believe that we should be waging this war in Yemen. Now, on top of that, Congress can block future arms sales to Saudi Arabia and do things with real teeth that prevent them from getting hardware.
What is the political pressure causing people to not support this? Like,
No idea. I mean, if
Saudi
you're,
lobbyists in D.C.
well, if you're Colin Peterson from Minnesota, like you've been working on a farm bill for years and years and years, you're not going to vote for anything that might mess that up. And so he got convinced to take this vote. I think that they probably could have. This wouldn't have scuttled the farm bill.
what's Paul Ryan's interest?
I have no idea. Doing Trump's bidding. It is. There's no good argument for continuing to support this war. It is creating a humanitarian catastrophe of like biblical magnitude. 20 million people need humanitarian aid in Yemen. Like 50,000 people may have died. It is like babies. It's children. There's no national security interest here. It is a fucking nightmare.
So what is like the fig leaf excuse that the Trump administration would give if you asked like Pompeo right now? Would it be this is to check Iran or something like that?
Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis, they're our allies. We need to help them fight malign Iranian influence in the region. Like when you view every problem on the planet through the prism of Iran, you go insane. And that's what
Right.
happened with these guys.
Which seems to be where conservatives have sort of led our foreign policy
Yeah, that's
in
where
the
we're
last
at.
like couple decades. So what can people do? Is this about pressuring Pelosi and the House Democrats to make sure that they vote on this very soon when
Yeah.
they take office?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it would be great if people do a few things. Like there have been some champions for this bill: Congressman Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, Chris Murphy, Mike Lee, who's a Republican. Tell them that they're great and give them a shout out. And then I think people should call their member of Congress if you care about this and say, please ask House leadership to schedule a vote the first week of January. Like days, minutes, hours actually matter here. Kids are dying right now. And so hopefully Pelosi will say, yeah, this is a no-brainer. We should absolutely do this because I don't know the argument against.
Yeah.
And if they don't, the political consequences for these five will be severe.
And if you want to know just how devastating this war is, I think Nick Kristof has been doing a great job
Yes.
writing about this in the New York Times. You can read some of his op-eds, and they've published pictures of some of these children who are dying of starvation. It is
Yeah.
fucking awful.
So Tyler Hicks is an amazing photographer. Declan Walsh, another New York Times reporter. They went into Yemen. They did this big piece a few weeks back that is like it's devastating to look at. They deserve a lot of credit. Also, credit to Chris Hayes and Nick Kristof for doing really great reporting and staying on top of this. So check out their reports if you want to learn more. But I've never been that vote was the angriest I've been at Congress in a really long time because it's so nonsensical and outrageous, but the stakes are so big.
Yeah. Okay. When we come back, we will have Lovett's interview with Julian Castro.